There is a moment, perhaps it comes in the stillness before dawn, or in the space between one breath and the next, when you feel it, the weight, not the weight of your body against the earth, but something far more insidious, far more complete. It is the weight of a life that has been shaped by invisible hands, molded by expectations you never chose, carved into a form that was never truly yours. You have been living, yes, breathing, working, loving, dreaming, but beneath the surface of this apparent freedom, something ancient and patient has been at work, like a spider weaving its web in darkness. The collective unconscious has spun around you threads so fine, so seemingly natural, that you mistake them for the very fabric of reality itself. These are the invisible chains Jung knew so well, not the crude shackles of physical bondage, but something infinitely more subtle, and therefore infinitely more powerful. Consider the fish, born in the depths of the ocean, who has never known anything but water. How could it conceive of air, of land, of the vast world beyond its liquid prison? It swims freely within its constraints, believing its small circle of current and coral to be the entirety of existence. This is the human condition as Jung observed it. We are fish swimming in the ocean of collective assumptions, breathing the water of inherited beliefs so naturally that we forget it is not air. Your invisible prison was built before you drew your first breath. It began in the wombs of your ancestors, in their unexamined fears and unlived dreams. It grew stronger with each generation that chose safety over authenticity, conformity over truth. By the time you arrived, gasping and new, the walls were already in place. Not walls you could touch or see, but walls nonetheless. Walls made of shoulds and musts, of what is proper and what is possible, of who you are allowed to be and who you must never become. In the beginning, these walls felt like protection. Your young psyche, tender and vulnerable, needed the shelter of the familiar, the warmth of belonging. The persona that social mask Jung described with such precision was a gift from the collective, a way to navigate the treacherous waters of human relationship without drowning in your own authenticity. You learned to smile when you felt like crying, to speak when you wanted to remain silent, to shrink when you longed to expand. Each compromise felt necessary, even wise. But something remarkable happens in the depth of a life lived unconsciously. The very structures that once protected you begin to suffocate you. The persona that was once a useful tool becomes a prison warden, monitoring your every thought, your every impulse, ensuring that nothing authentic disturbs the peace of collective slumber. You find yourself living inside a life that feels increasingly foreign, like wearing clothes that were tailored for someone else's body, someone else's dreams. This is the first stirring of what Jung called the individuation process, not a comfortable journey toward self-improvement, but a dangerous awakening from the collective dream. It begins with a strange discomfort, a restlessness that no achievement can quiet, no relationship can fill. You look around at your life, perhaps successful by every external measure, and feel a profound disconnection, as if you are watching someone else's movie, someone else's choices unfolding on the screen of your days. The invisible chains reveal themselves first through their weight. You notice how heavy it feels to maintain the mask, how exhausting it is to perform the role you have been given. The businessman begins to question why he dreads Monday mornings. The perfect mother starts to wonder who she might have been if motherhood had not consumed every other possibility. The dutiful child, now grown, feels a strange rebellion stirring in places they had long forgotten existed. But recognition is only the beginning. To see the chains is not yet to break them. For these bonds were forged not just by society, but by your own deep need to belong, to be accepted, to avoid the terrifying prospect of standing alone in your truth. The prisoner who has lived in darkness for years will flinch when the door opens, preferring the familiar comfort of captivity to the unknown territory of freedom. Jung understood that the first movement toward liberation is often experienced as a kind of death, the death of who you thought you were, who you have worked so hard to become. The ego, that tiny but persistent voice that believes it knows best, rebels against this dissolution. It clings to its carefully constructed identity, its hard-won achievements, its rightful place in the social order. To question the fundamental assumptions of your life feels like stepping off a cliff into an abyss of uncertainty. Yet something deeper than the ego is stirring now. The self, Jung's term for that vast, mysterious center of the psyche that transcends the small confines of personal identity, begins to assert its ancient claim on your life. It speaks not through the rational mind, but through dreams that disturb your sleep, through synchronicities that crack open the facade of coincidence, through a growing sense that there is more to existence than the narrow corridors you have been taught to walk. The invisible prison begins to reveal itself through its very invisibility. You start to notice how certain thoughts seem forbidden, how certain possibilities feel impossibly distant. You observe the subtle ways you police your own experience, cutting off lines of inquiry before they can threaten the stability of your constructed world. You see how your relationships have been shaped more by unconscious contract than by genuine choice, each person playing their assigned role in the great drama of collective unconsciousness. This recognition brings with it a profound loneliness. To see the matrix is to step outside it, at least partially, and from this new vantage point, the automatic behaviors of others become visible in ways that can be both heartbreaking and isolating. You watch people you love moving through their lives like sleepwalkers, bumping into the same psychological furniture again and again, never quite waking up to the larger possibilities that life offers. But this loneliness is sacred, for it is the loneliness of the individual beginning to individuate, of the soul preparing to embark on its most important journey. Jung called this the nigredo, the blackening, that phase of inner alchemy where all that is false must be stripped away before anything true can emerge. It is the dark night that precedes all authentic dawn. The walls of your invisible prison are becoming visible now, shimmering like heat mirages in the desert of your awakening consciousness. You can almost reach out and touch them, these barriers made of fear and conditioning, of unlived life and suppressed truth. Soon you will discover that these walls, which seemed so solid, so permanent, are more fragile than you ever dared imagine. Soon you will learn that the key to your liberation has been in your pocket all along, disguised as the very courage it takes to truly see the nature of your captivity. The descent has begun, not down into darkness, but down into truth, not toward destruction, but toward the sacred ground of your own authentic being, where the work of rebuilding, not your life, but your relationship to living itself, can finally begin. There comes a morning when you catch sight of yourself in the mirror and feel like you're looking at a stranger, not the familiar stranger of bad hair or tired eyes, but something far more unsettling, a recognition that the face staring back at you belongs to someone you no longer recognize as yourself. The features are yours, yes, but the expression, the energy, the very essence radiating from those familiar eyes feels alien, as if you've been wearing someone else's face for so long that you've forgotten what your own looks like beneath the mask. This is the moment Jung anticipated, with both compassion and awe, when the persona, that carefully crafted social identity you've been perfecting since childhood, begins to crack like old paint on a wall exposed to too many seasons of heat and cold. The mask that once fit so perfectly, that once felt like protection and belonging, now chafes against something deeper that is trying to emerge. You feel the weight of it, this false face you present to the world, pressing down on your authentic self like a heavy costume you can no longer remember putting on. The persona was never meant to be permanent. Jung understood it as a necessary developmental stage, like the chrysalis that protects the transforming butterfly. In youth, we need this adaptive shell. It teaches us how to navigate social complexity, how to be acceptable, how to survive in a world that often punishes authenticity with rejection or abandonment. The child learns quickly which expressions bring approval, which behaviors earn love, which aspects of their true nature must be hidden to maintain the precious connection with those they need for survival. But what serves the child can strangle the adult. What was once adaptive becomes maladaptive. What once brought life now brings a kind of living death. The persona that protected your tender core from the harsh judgments of others has now become the very thing that prevents others from knowing who you truly are, and worse, prevents you from knowing yourself. You begin to notice the exhaustion first, how tired you feel after social gatherings, where you performed your role flawlessly, how drained you become from conversations where you said all the right things but felt nothing authentic pass between you and the other person. There's a particular kind of fatigue that comes from living as an imposter in your own life, from maintaining a performance that never quite ends because the audience never quite goes away. The cracking begins subtly. Perhaps you find yourself saying something that surprises you, something that feels more true than polite. Maybe you catch yourself in a moment of spontaneous laughter that sounds different from your usual social laugh, deeper, wilder, more alive. Or you might notice that certain conversations now feel impossible to navigate, not because you don't know what to say, but because all the things you would normally say feel hollow, meaningless, like echoes in an empty cathedral. This is the sacred rebellion beginning in your depths. The self, that vast, mysterious center of your being that Jung knew to be far larger and wiser than the ego's small concerns, begins to assert its claim on your life. It grows restless with the pretense, impatient with the performance, unwilling to remain hidden beneath layers of social acceptability any longer. It wants to breathe, to speak, to move through the world with the natural authority of authentic being. The people in your life may notice before you do. They might comment that you seem different, that something has changed about you, though they can't quite put their finger on what. Some will welcome this emerging authenticity, having been waiting years for the real you to show up. Others will resist it, sensing that your transformation threatens the stability of the roles and dynamics they've grown comfortable with. The people who love your persona more than your essence will begin to feel unsafe, and they'll try, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, to pull you back into the familiar patterns that make them feel secure. This resistance from others can be one of the most difficult aspects of the persona's dissolution. You discover that many of your relationships were built on the foundation of your false self, sustained by your willingness to play a certain character in the drama of their lives. As you begin to step out of that character, some relationships will deepen, becoming more real and nourishing than ever before. Others will wither, reveal themselves as transactional arrangements that can't survive the authentic presence of who you actually are. The cracking accelerates when you start to notice the internal contradictions. You observe yourself saying yes when every fiber of your being wants to say no. You catch yourself laughing at jokes that aren't funny, agreeing with opinions that violate your deepest convictions, participating in activities that drain rather than enliven you. The gap between your outer performance and inner reality becomes so wide that maintaining the pretense requires more and more energy, like trying to hold together a dam that's developing new leaks every day. Dreams often herald this transformation with powerful imagery. Jung knew that the unconscious speaks in symbols, and the cracking persona frequently appears in dreams as breaking mirrors, crumbling masks, shattering windows, or peeling skin. You might dream of being naked in public and discovering that instead of shame, you feel liberated. Or you might find yourself in dreams where you're playing a role in a play but have forgotten all your lines, forced to improvise from some deeper place of truth. The fear that accompanies this process can be overwhelming. If you are not the person you've been pretending to be, then who are you? If you remove the mask that everyone recognizes as you, what will they find underneath? What if there's nothing there? What if your authentic self is unlovable, unacceptable, too strange or too much or too little for this world that demands such careful calibration of appearance and behavior? These fears are the birth pangs of authenticity. Jung understood that every genuine transformation involves a death, the death of who we thought we were, so that who we actually are can finally be born. The ego resists this death with everything it has, clinging to the familiar identity like a child clutches a security blanket. It would rather live a diminished life as someone else than risk the uncertainty of discovering who it truly is. But something unstoppable has been set in motion. The crack in the persona lets light in, and light, once it enters, has a way of revealing everything that was hidden in the darkness. You begin to see not just how false your mask has been, but how many authentic parts of yourself you sacrificed to maintain it. The artist who became an accountant, the wild child who became the responsible adult, the mystic who learned to speak only in practical terms, the rebel who submitted to convention, the lover who learned to be safe. Each recognition brings both grief and relief. Grief for the years spent in exile from yourself, for the opportunities missed while you were busy being who others needed you to be, but also relief, the profound relief of finally understanding why you felt so tired, so hollow, so perpetually homesick, even when you were exactly where you thought you wanted to be. You were homesick for yourself, longing for the authentic being that had been waiting patiently beneath the performance, holding space for your eventual return. The cracking becomes a cascade. One authentic moment leads to another. One honest conversation opens the door to deeper honesty. One choice made from your true center makes the next authentic choice a little easier. The persona doesn't shatter all at once. That would be too shocking, too disorienting. Instead, it develops hairline fractures that gradually widen, allowing more and more of your essential self to shine through. Others begin to respond differently to you. Some are drawn to this emerging authenticity, like flowers turning toward the sun. They sense something real in your presence, something that was missing before, even if they couldn't name what it was. These people become allies in your transformation, mirrors reflecting back to you the beauty and power of your unmasked self. Their recognition helps you trust that what's emerging is not only acceptable but precious, not only tolerable but magnificent. The old persona fights back, of course. It stages elaborate campaigns to reclaim control, convincing you that authenticity is selfish, that your true self is too much for others to handle, that safety lies in returning to the familiar patterns of performance and pretense. But these counterattacks become weaker and less convincing as you taste more and more of what it feels like to move through the world as yourself. And in the quiet moments, when the social stage is empty and you're alone with just the truth of your being, you begin to feel something you may not have felt since childhood, the simple, uncomplicated joy of existing as yourself, not the you that others want you to be, not the you that you think you should be, but the you that you have always been beneath all the layers of adaptation and accommodation. The mask is cracking, and the light pouring through those cracks is your own light, the radiance of an authentic soul finally ready to be seen. In the basement of your psyche, in chambers you have spent a lifetime pretending don't exist, dwells everything you have rejected about yourself. Here, in this underground kingdom Jung called the shadow, live all the aspects of your humanity that you learned were unacceptable, your anger, your selfishness, your sexuality, your wildness, your need, your darkness, but also, hidden in these same depths like treasure buried in a cave, lies your undiscovered gold, the creativity you deemed impractical, the sensitivity you learned was weakness, the power you were taught was dangerous, the brilliance you dimmed to avoid standing out. For most of your life, you have lived like a person who owns a vast house, but only inhabits the upper floors, carefully avoiding the basement where strange sounds echo and unfamiliar shadows move across the walls. You have organized your entire existence around keeping that basement door locked, barricaded, forgotten. But the shadow does not disappear when ignored. It grows stronger in the darkness, more insistent, more determined to be acknowledged. And now, as your persona begins to crack and authentic light starts to filter into your consciousness, these shadow aspects of yourself begin to demand recognition. The first sign of shadow work often comes through projection, that unconscious mechanism by which we cast onto others the very qualities we cannot bear to see in ourselves. You find yourself inexplicably triggered by certain people, filled with a disproportionate rage or disgust that seems to come from nowhere. The arrogant person who makes your skin crawl, the needy individual whose desperation repulses you, the selfish behavior that sends you into righteous indignation. Jung knew that what we cannot tolerate in others is almost always what we cannot tolerate in ourselves, the disowned parts of our nature projected onto the external world, like images cast by an unconscious projector. But something miraculous happens when you begin to turn toward your shadow instead of away from it. Instead of immediately judging that person who triggers you, you pause, you breathe, you ask the dangerous question, what is it about this person that I recognize in myself? The question feels like swallowing poison at first, like betraying everything you believe about your own goodness, your own carefully maintained self-image. But courage, that quality Jung knew was essential for any real transformation, allows you to look deeper. And in that looking, you make a startling discovery. The very quality you despise in another exists within you too, perhaps in embryonic form, perhaps buried so deep you forgot it was there, but present nonetheless. Your hatred of arrogance might mask your own suppressed confidence. Your disgust with neediness might hide your own unacknowledged longing for support. Your rage at selfishness might camouflage your own unexpressed desire to put yourself first for once in your life. This recognition brings you face to face with the nigredo, the alchemical blackening that Jung understood as the necessary first phase of psychological transformation. Like the death and decay that must occur in soil before new life can grow, you must descend into the dark matter of your own rejected humanity before any genuine wholeness can emerge. It is not comfortable work. It does not feel spiritual or enlightened or noble. It feels like drowning in your own contradictions, like discovering that everything you thought you knew about yourself was incomplete, sanitized, partial. The shadow contains not just your personal darkness, but also the collective shadow, all the rejected aspects of your family lineage, your culture, your species, the rage your grandmother never expressed lives in your cellular memory, the wildness your ancestors had to suppress for survival pulses in your bloodstream, the power your culture taught you was dangerous courses through your nervous system. When you begin shadow work, you are not just integrating your own disowned aspects, but participating in the healing of generations of split-off human wholeness. Dreams often become the bridge between conscious awareness and shadow recognition. Jung knew that dreams speak the language of symbol and metaphor, offering safe passage into territories too threatening for the rational mind to explore directly. You might dream of dark figures pursuing you, not as enemies, but as lost parts of yourself trying to return home. You might encounter in your dreams a version of yourself that behaves in ways your waking mind finds shocking, aggressive, sexual, selfish, wild. These dream figures are not nightmares but invitations, shadow aspects of your psyche requesting acknowledgement, integration, acceptance. The process of shadow integration begins with what Jung called holding the tension of the opposites. Instead of immediately judging or rejecting the dark aspects you discover within yourself, you learn to hold them alongside your light aspects, creating space for both to exist within the larger container of your expanding self-awareness. This is not about acting out destructively or abandoning moral responsibility, but about acknowledging the full spectrum of human potential that exists within you. You might discover, for instance, that beneath your people-pleasing exterior lives a fierce warrior who has been imprisoned by your need to be liked. This warrior aspect of your shadow doesn't need to become destructive. It needs to be acknowledged, honored, and integrated in service of healthy boundaries and authentic self-expression. Your suppressed anger might be revealed as power that was taught to masquerade as politeness. Your disowned sexuality might be creative life force that was channeled into acceptable but uninspiring directions. The shadow work becomes particularly intense when you encounter what Jung called the positive shadow, all the brilliant, powerful, magnificent aspects of yourself that you learned were too much, too dangerous, too likely to threaten others or make you a target. Perhaps you dimmed your intelligence to avoid intimidating others. Maybe you suppressed your natural leadership to avoid responsibility. You might have hidden your artistic gifts to pursue more practical paths. These golden aspects of your shadow often feel even more threatening to reclaim than the dark ones, because owning your magnificence requires a level of courage and self-responsibility that can feel overwhelming. As you begin to reclaim these disowned parts of yourself, something profound starts to happen in your relationships. The people who once triggered your unconscious projections begin to affect you differently. That arrogant person who used to make you furious now simply seems like someone expressing confidence in a way you haven't learned to accept in yourself. The needy individual who repulsed you becomes a mirror for your own unacknowledged vulnerability. You start to see others not as carriers of your disowned shadow, but as fellow human beings struggling with their own wholeness. This shift in perception is the beginning of genuine compassion, not the sentimental kind that comes from pity, but the robust compassion that comes from recognizing your shared humanity with even those who express the most challenging aspects of human nature. When you can acknowledge the potential for arrogance, selfishness, cruelty, and destructiveness within yourself, you can meet these qualities in others without the reactive charge that once destabilized you. The integration process is not linear. Your shadow aspects don't simply line up politely waiting to be acknowledged and absorbed into consciousness. They emerge in waves, sometimes gently, sometimes with the force of tsunami. You might have a period where you feel like you're drowning in your own darkness, convinced that you are a terrible person for harboring such thoughts, feelings, and impulses. This is normal. This is necessary. This is the chaos that precedes the new order of integrated wholeness. Jung understood that the goal of shadow work is not to eliminate these dark aspects, but to develop a conscious relationship with them. When you can acknowledge your capacity for anger without being possessed by rage, when you can recognize your selfishness without being overwhelmed by guilt, when you can admit your neediness without drowning in shame, then these shadow aspects become available to serve your wholeness rather than sabotage it. The paradox of shadow work is that the more you accept your darkness, the more your natural light shines, the more you acknowledge your flaws, the more your genuine strengths emerge, the more you admit your human limitations, the more access you have to your divine potential. It's as if the energy you spent suppressing and denying these aspects of yourself is suddenly available for more creative and life-affirming purposes. Others begin to respond to this emerging wholeness in ways that might surprise you. Instead of rejecting you for your acknowledged darkness, many people feel more comfortable around you, more able to be authentic themselves. Your willingness to own your shadow gives others permission to stop pretending they are saints. Your integration creates a field of safety where others can begin their own shadow work. But perhaps the most profound shift is internal. As you reclaim these disowned parts of yourself, you begin to feel more solid, more present, more real. The exhaustion of maintaining a false purity dissolves. The hypervigilance of constantly monitoring and suppressing your unacceptable aspects relaxes. You discover that wholeness, not perfection, is the goal of human development, and that your darkness, when conscious and integrated, becomes one of your greatest sources of wisdom and power. In the depths of your own shadow, you find not the monster you feared, but the missing pieces of your own humanity, and in embracing these pieces, with compassion, with courage, with the fierce love that true transformation requires, you take one more crucial step toward becoming who you have always been beneath the divisions and rejections and fragmentations that kept you from your own wholeness. The shadow is no longer your enemy but your teacher, no longer your shame but your strength, no longer the part of you that must be hidden but the part that, when consciously integrated, makes you authentically, powerfully, magnificently human. There comes a moment in the depths of your awakening when you realize that the vast majority of your thoughts are not your own. Like a radio that has been tuned to the same frequency for so long, you forgot it was possible to change the station. Your mind has been broadcasting the collective programming of your family, your culture, your era, and you have been mistaking this transmission for the voice of your own wisdom. You begin to see that what you believed were your carefully considered opinions are often nothing more than inherited assumptions, hand-me-down beliefs passed down through generations, like old furniture that no one questions or examines anymore. Jung called this unconscious identification with groupthink, the participation mystique, that primitive psychological state where individual consciousness dissolves into the collective current, where personal identity becomes so merged with mass opinion that the boundary between self and other, between individual thought and cultural hypnosis, disappears entirely. Most people live their entire lives in this state, swimming in the collective stream without ever realizing they are wet, following invisible currents they never chose, carried along by psychological forces they never learned to recognize, much less resist. But you are beginning to wake up inside the dream, like a lucid dreamer who suddenly realizes they are dreaming while still within the dream. You start to observe the collective trance from a place of increasing awareness. You notice how certain ideas move through groups like contagion, how opinions spread not through careful consideration, but through emotional resonance, how people adopt beliefs not because they have examined them, but because believing them provides the comfort of belonging, the safety of being part of the herd. This awakening brings both liberation and profound disorientation. To question the collective sleep is to risk everything: your sense of belonging, your social identity, your place in the comfortable rhythms of mass unconsciousness. It is to discover that the water you have been swimming in your entire life is not the natural element you thought it was, but a manufactured environment designed to keep you safely contained within the boundaries of acceptable thought and feeling. You begin to notice how the media you consume shapes your emotional state in ways you never recognized, how the conversations you have with others often follow predictable scripts, recycling the same acceptable opinions, the same safe topics, the same unexamined assumptions, how your family gatherings repeat the same patterns of interaction, the same roles, the same dynamics that were established generations ago and have been running on autopilot ever since. The political beliefs you thought you arrived at through rational analysis reveal themselves as emotional inheritances from your tribe. The spiritual ideas you believed were personal discoveries turn out to be collective concepts you absorbed from your cultural environment. The values you thought defined your individual character emerge as the values of your particular historical moment, your specific social class, your unique geographical location, no more inherently true or false than the values of any other time or place, but certainly not the universal truths you once imagined them to be. This recognition can be shattering. If your thoughts are not your own, if your beliefs are borrowed, if your values are inherited rather than chosen, then who are you? What remains when you strip away all the layers of collective conditioning? The ego, so invested in its carefully constructed identity, recoils from this questioning. It prefers the certainty of unexamined belief to the uncertainty of individual consciousness. It would rather be right according to the collective than face the terrifying freedom of thinking for itself. But something deeper than the ego is stirring, that vast, mysterious center Jung called the self, which exists beyond the narrow confines of cultural programming and historical accident. This self is not interested in being right according to any external standard. It is interested in truth, in authenticity, in the courage to see clearly regardless of what that seeing might cost in terms of social comfort and collective acceptance. Dreams often herald this awakening with images of leaving crowds, walking away from groups, finding yourself alone in landscapes that feel both frightening and magnificent. You might dream of being the only person awake in a city of sleepers, or of seeing through walls that others cannot perceive. These dreams are not nightmares but initiations, invitations from your deeper wisdom to step outside the warm circle of collective unconsciousness into the cold clarity of individual awareness. The process of questioning collective assumptions is like learning to breathe different air. At first, it feels unnatural, even dangerous. You catch yourself thinking thoughts that your family would find disturbing, holding opinions that your social circle would reject, asking questions that your culture considers inappropriate or unnecessary. The collective has powerful immune responses to individual consciousness. It will try to pull you back into the comfortable trance through ridicule, guilt, fear, or the simple gravitational pull of mass opinion. You begin to see how social media functions as a kind of collective nervous system, transmitting emotional states and ideological positions across vast networks of unconscious minds. How news cycles create artificial rhythms of outrage and fear that have nothing to do with the actual rhythms of your individual life. How advertising doesn't just sell products but sells identities, lifestyles, ways of being that keep you consuming not just goods but ideas about who you should be and what should matter to you. The relationships in your life begin to sort themselves into new categories. Some people reveal themselves as fellow travelers on the path of awakening, capable of questioning their own assumptions and engaging with ideas that challenge their established worldview. Others show themselves to be deeply invested in the collective sleep, uncomfortable with any conversation that ventures beyond the safe boundaries of accepted opinion, quick to shut down inquiry with appeals to authority or social pressure. This sorting process can be lonely and disorienting. You discover that many of your relationships were built on the foundation of shared unconsciousness, sustained by mutual agreement to avoid any topic or perspective that might threaten the stability of collective belief. As you begin to think for yourself, some relationships deepen and become more authentic. Others reveal themselves as too fragile to survive the introduction of genuine individual consciousness. The family dynamics you once navigated unconsciously become visible as intricate systems of mutual conditioning. You see how each family member plays their assigned role in maintaining the family's unconscious equilibrium, how certain topics are forbidden, not by explicit rule but by invisible agreement, how the family myth protects itself by discouraging any member from seeing too clearly or questioning too deeply. Your relationship with authority begins to transform. Instead of automatically accepting the pronouncements of experts, leaders, and institutions, you develop the capacity to evaluate their claims based on your own observation and reasoning. This doesn't mean becoming cynical or rejecting all external guidance, but rather developing the discernment to distinguish between wisdom and mere opinion, between genuine authority based on knowledge and experience, and artificial authority based on position and power. The process of developing individual consciousness is not about rejecting everything collective or becoming an isolated rebel without a cause. It is about learning to participate consciously in collective life rather than unconsciously. It is about being able to join groups and causes and movements while maintaining your individual center, contributing your unique perspective, rather than simply adding another voice to the echo chamber. You begin to understand that the collective is not inherently bad or wrong. It serves important functions, preserving knowledge, creating culture, providing the social cooperation that makes human civilization possible. The problem is not the collective itself, but unconscious participation in it, the surrender of individual awareness to groupthink, the replacement of personal discernment with mass opinion. As your individual consciousness strengthens, you develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold different perspectives simultaneously without collapsing into the emotional charge of any single position. You can understand why people believe what they believe without needing to believe it yourself. You can participate in collective activities while maintaining your inner independence. You can belong to groups while keeping your individual soul intact. This awakening to the nature of collective consciousness is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process. The pull of the collective sleep is strong, and there will be times when you find yourself drawn back into unconscious identification with group opinions and mass emotions. But once you have tasted the freedom of individual consciousness, the return to collective unconsciousness becomes increasingly uncomfortable and temporary. You develop a kind of internal radar that can detect when you are thinking collectively rather than individually, when you are feeling emotions that belong to the group rather than arising from your own authentic experience. This radar becomes one of your most valuable tools for maintaining psychological independence in a world that profits from your unconsciousness, that benefits from your willing participation in mass hypnosis. The questioning of collective assumptions leads eventually to a profound realization that consciousness itself is the ultimate rebellion, that awareness is the most radical act, that the simple willingness to see clearly and think independently is one of the greatest gifts you can offer to a world trapped in the dreams of its own making. Standing outside the collective sleep, you begin to see not just the limitations and illusions of mass consciousness, but also its beauty, its necessity, its role in the larger pattern of human evolution. You develop compassion for those still caught in the trance, remembering your own long sleep, understanding the safety and comfort that unconsciousness provides. Your questioning becomes not an attack on the collective, but a service to it, a demonstration that individual consciousness is possible, that awakening is available, that the dream of unconscious living need not be permanent or absolute. From this place of awakened individual consciousness, you begin to engage with the collective world in an entirely new way, not as a sleepwalker moving through a dream, but as a conscious being choosing how to participate in the great human experiment of creating meaning, culture, and connection, while remaining true to the deeper wisdom that lives beyond all collective programming, in the eternal silence of your own authentic being. Deep, in the secret chambers of your soul, a revolution is stirring. It begins quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the first tremor before an earthquake that will reshape the entire landscape of your existence. Your spirit, having tasted the freedom of questioning collective assumptions and integrating shadow wisdom, now turns its attention to the most intimate prison of all, the tyranny of should and must that has governed your choices for so long that you mistake these external voices for the whisper of your own conscience.